Oh yeah, that's what everybody says too. Don't worry about it. Oh, you'll be fine. I hear that so much. Oh, you'll be fine. I'm like, when a cow is like,
just a little bit of wind and water, Seth.
Worry about it.
Man.
Hey, Jane.
Just a little bit of wind and water.
Yeah.
Actually, Hurricane Fran is what moved me to Colorado, along with some medical issues. I was just clearing up some medical issues from when I was in the Marine Corps, and Hurricane Fran hit Wilmington, North Carolina. It was the third hurricane in 3 years, and me and my buddies were like, "We're out of here, move to the mountains."
Yeah. Semper Fi. My son was a Marine.
Semper Fi.
My father was a Marine in World War II.
Thank you for your service, brother.
Thank you.
All right, let's get things going. Let's get this party rocking. Good evening, everybody. It's 1 minute after 2 a.m. Friday morning in Paris, France, which of course can only mean one thing. It's time for another episode of The Yard. In addition to our live broadcast on the Zoom channel, which is of course being taped, we're being seen on Facebook Live, on Twitter, on YouTube, and copies of this and all past episodes can be found on YouTube. If you go to YouTube and then enter in Commissary Club, you'll see them. And very excitingly, as we've mentioned in the past, soon we're going to be seen literally on hundreds of thousands of tablets inside of 430 some odd jails and prisons from coast to coast. So our brothers and sisters doing time will have a chance to be part of The Yard too. The Yard is a production of Commissary Club, which is the first social network for 70 million Americans with a criminal record. We have not officially launched the app yet, but we will soon. But anybody who would like, please go to the App Store, or if you have an iOS or an Android, you can get download the app. It's for free, and there's already a bunch of people posting stuff. So we'd love you to be part of that. My name is Richard Bronson. I'm the founder and CEO of Commissary Club, as well as 70 Million Jobs, which is the national employment platform for folks with records. Tonight, we have got the old gang back together. We have my good friend and teammate, Seth Sundberg. Seth, of course, was a legend in the NBA.
Oh, of course.
And his games are still like spoken of reverentially, whenever NBA people get together. And we also have the man, the myth, the legend, the rapper to the stars, the entrepreneur par excellence, the fabulous Divine. Hey, D, how are you?
Good evening, Richard. Great to be back.
Great to have you. Some very exciting news. Our Divine, 2 days ago, became a grandfather for the first time. His son and daughter-in-law had a little baby girl by the name of Capri. And mother and child are doing wonderfully. And Divine is, I think so happy. So there's so much love in his life, and we're thrilled for you. We are also welcoming back the equally fabulous Adrian Hatter, who was traveling last week. Thank you, Amanda, for your help in pulling things off and pulling things together. But Adrian is back in the saddle. And as you know, she's the brains of the organization, and someone that if you need to communicate with any of us, please, talk to Adrian. And if you'd like to be part of the conversation, we had some guy who joined us in our conversation last week, and that was great. So if you feel inspired or have something that you want to say, please just connect with Adrian. Similarly, if you have comments or questions, please use the chat feature. We are, as I reported last week, our businesses are going great guns right now. As everybody knows, companies are having a hell of a time filling positions. And even though that the unemployment rate is low, there's still, every week there are more unfilled jobs because people just don't want to go back to work, apparently. So that has created an opportunity for the population we serve. So companies have become more lax in their hiring practices. And what they're discovering is that, our population actually does incredibly well on the job, because they have few options. They work really hard. They have a great attitude. They appreciate the opportunity. They show up with a smile on their face, and they stick around longer than people without records. So, it's good. It's been good for our business, but it's been really great for the people that, we serve. Last week, I just want to mention this. I think there are a few people here tonight who were here last week. If I may, I want to speak for Divine and Adrian, because I think the three of us sort of share feelings. Seth looks at things a little bit differently. Last week, we had a very interesting guy on by the name of Emiliano Lopez. He had served a long prison sentence. And, since he's been out, he's been doing some interesting things and working, as an advocate for, criminal justice reform. He's building an app, actually, that will enable people to sort of rate and talk about their parole officers, sort of like Yelp for parole officers, I guess, which is an interesting concept to foster accountability and connect people. Over the course, but maybe about halfway through, one of the people in our audience who I did not recognize, I think was maybe a friend of his, she wrote that I guess she was offended by what we were doing. And I'm just paraphrasing her now, but as I recall, her feeling was we were insensitive to Emiliano's feelings or the trauma that perhaps he has been through, and that in a sense, as a result, we were exploiting him. We were laughing, we were making jokes about things. And her feeling was, I thought this was an opportunity for him to not rehash painful things from the past, but rather talk about the good things that he's doing now. And, she objected. And I brought it up, and then I asked Emiliano if he in fact felt like we were exploiting him, because honestly, it's not what we want to do, and if we were, we'd want to change that immediately. When I asked him if he thought we were, his answer was, I was expecting him to say, no, not at all, and that wasn't how he responded. It was clear that he was bothered. He said something like, well, I didn't realize that you guys all went to prison, which is to say, if you went to prison, maybe you have a right to, you know what it's about, you can joke about it, whatever. But of course he knew we went to prison because we talked about it. And as a matter of fact, before we went on, I asked, is there anything that you don't want to talk about? Because we want to be sensitive to that. And he goes, no, I'm very transparent. The idea behind the yard is, as the name suggests, we try to create this environment that is sort of a reenactment of being on the yard when you're in prison. And I was I don't know if this woman was ever in prison, but I certainly was, as was Seth, as was, Divine, as was our guest tonight, as was Emiliano. And out on the yard, be it men or women, it's a very honest, very kind of fluid dialogue that goes on, and there's laughing and there's joking and there's yelling and arguing, and there are tears when, there's tragic news. but that's just the way people are, you know? And that's what we try to foster, that sort of environment, because that's authentic and it's real. And anytime we get real and honest and raw on the yard, those are the times when I love it the best. That's my opinion, you know? And that's what people seem to, you know, agree with us. You know, Divine spoke incredibly eloquently, I thought, in response to what this woman had said and how Emiliano reacted. And he said something that, you know, really, I've repeated it many times to other people because I think it's just so eloquent and poignant what he said. And he said something to the effect of, you know, when you go through this experience, there are so many tears, and at a certain point, you just can't cry anymore. And sometimes the tears are replaced by laughter. And that's what I think happened then, you know? And I don't think that's a bad thing. I'm sorry she felt that way. And I appreciate the fact that she felt she was sticking up for a friend, if that's in fact the case. And I'm sorry if he felt a little uncomfortable. That's the first case. We've done this 40 times. So I guess, you know, that's a pretty good record if that's the only time when someone felt that way. You know, I certainly hope others didn't feel that way. But forget about the work that I do. You know, I got to stick up for my team and their commitment and, you know, desire to do the opposite of exploit, which is to say support and help and advocate for the population we serve. My team doesn't make a lot of money. You know, we've never taken a penny from a single person with a record, not a penny. And yet my team routinely is working late at night on their own time, helping people create resumes, holding their hands, walking them off the ledge when they're about to freak out about something. And, you know, I don't feel their intentions are above reproach. And they're certainly not exploiting anybody. I think it's just the opposite. You know, sometimes I feel I'm exploiting them because, you know, the demands that we put on them are so great because the needs are so great. So, I mean, I would ask everybody, if you feel, again, we're doing something wrong, we're not perfect. I mean, we went to prison. We're definitely not perfect. You know, tell us how we can do better or where we're missing it. You know, your opinions mean a great deal to us, you know, but honestly, I've given this over the course of a week a lot of thought. And, you know, frankly, I feel like they were wrong. So that's my opinion. All right, that was last week. This week is a new week and we're gonna do it better. You know, again, out on the yard, there are people you hang out with that, you know, you become friends with and very, very close to. And I can't say that I went to prison with our next guest, but I have no doubt that if I did, he would have been one of the guys I'd be hanging out with because I've gotten to know him just a little bit and he's doing all kinds of incredible stuff now. And again, I asked before we started if there were any subjects that are off limits, and he said, absolutely not. I put myself out there. So
now it's on record, Buck. All right.
We got you now, buddy. We got you now, Buck.
Fire away, man. Fire away.
Yes, I'm taking that seriously, that commitment. In any event, the guy on the yard that I'd love you all to meet, his name is Buck Adams. And, you know, I always try to like think of that one sentence that sort of captures the whole thing. And I think Buck has discovered the underlying art of incarceration. He served a 7-year sentence. I think it was for aggravated assault or felonious assault or something, but he'll tell us about it.
Yep.
And when he went to prison, he couldn't help but notice all of the incredible creativity and talent that was around him. Buck himself is an artist. And while in prison, he taught his fellow inmates about yoga and meditation. And since he's been out, he has launched Art for Redemption, which is a company designed to help all of the incarcerated creators out there gain, invaluable exposure and have a chance to sell their art. Buck is yet another in a long line of the art guests who, it just blows my mind, who, when they're released from prison, rather than trying to put their past behind them and run as far away as they can, from their experience and distance themselves from prison life, instead, he comes back to prisons to help his brothers and sisters take their talents and use them to earn a living. Buck has worked with Defy Ventures, which is a nonprofit in the reentry space that I used to work at, and a program that Seth went through. He really proves that, nobody can stifle a real artist. Prison certainly can't do it. So Buck, thanks so much for joining us on The Yard.
Thanks for having me, Richard. Thanks, Seth and Divine. I'm looking forward to this evening.
By the way, I left out, I'm sorry, Buck. I was saying that I was speaking for Adrian and Divine, but Seth, who is a much nicer person than I am, God knows, Seth, his attitude towards last week, and then I'm going to leave it alone, but Seth's attitude was, wait a second, that's the way the yard is. Everybody doesn't always get along. There are misunderstandings, there are disagreements, there are arguments and whatever. That's real.
Yeah.
Don't try to avoid it or make believe it doesn't happen. That's part of the experience. And, it also makes good TV. So, Seth, I don't think took it personally. Seth took it like, okay, this is reality that we're watching.
Yeah,
so,
I think there's also a piece that, and I can speak personally before we get into the yard itself, just every week, like this is cathartic. You know what I mean? Like this is, it's like you said, Richard, it's this stuff is not easy, but every time we talk about it, every time we get there, the more laughs we have about it, the more it becomes a little easier, you know what I mean? And we get through it more and we build other bonds and all that. And, I think Emiliano was great in that. And I think that, the question was poignant and I understand where they're coming from too. So, it's just the process. This is part of reentry just as a whole, you know what I mean? And going through the shit that we went through too. So, anyways.
I'll jump in on that for a second. I wasn't part of last week, obviously, but for my whole experience, the whole thing is just became acceptance. Is if you can't accept that what happened and the process of obviously we all made mistakes as part of human beings. We all make mistakes. And if you look in the mirror and don't think that you make a mistake, you probably need to review your day a little bit more. But just some of us get caught, some of us do worse things. And, it's the acceptance part of that, hey, if you can't talk about it and accept it and be real about what you've gone through, I don't know what to say. Then there's probably a deeper dive that you need to do on yourself. And that's, that was part of my experience in prison. Was it really gave me a moment to really think about what the hell I was doing with my life, and what I did to get there. And, the whole process of, I remember being, in the little black box and handcuffed and chains and riding on the bus and rolling up to the big house with, barbed wire around it and Constantine wire and the shot fence and going, what the F did I just do to get to here? But,
yep. And you were black boxed from the beginning?
Yeah.
Was it feds or state?
Say that again, Divine.
Federal or state?
State. So I went to trial and, unfortunately, my sentence had a mandatory sentence to it. So it was like straight into the situation. You know, I got handcuffed right there at trial and went in and waited with 90 days for sentencing. That was a crazy situation. I'm sure we'll chat about that a little bit more. But like, I was in a room that's probably about the size of the room I'm in right now with 8 other guys and an open toilet and open shower. And I was just like, wow, you know.
All right, so let's I don't want to jump the gun here. Let's just
Yeah,
sort of
yeah.
get out of the way.
Sorry about that.
No. That's, you know, prison is messy, so it's
Yeah.
okay. So tell us, if you don't mind, what it was that you got in trouble with, you know, and how did that all happen? How did it go down? And when did this occur?
It was May 2015. I was dealing with a squatter in a rental property, actually in the garage of a rental property. My girlfriend and I had left the country for a few weeks, came back and had found a bunch of things in the garage and figured out who it was and how it happened. It ended up being the groundskeepers allowed somebody to store some things there. And it was like, well, they need to get their stuff out. It's not allowed. Over the next few weeks, it became more prevalent that they were actually living in the garage. The garage had a loft above it. And so it just became this escalated, kept ratcheting up. I found myself becoming like the proverbial frog in boiling water. I didn't realize, you know, my self-talk and my own anger, what was happening. And then finally it was like, well, you've got this date to get out this time. And about an hour and a half, 2 hours later, past that deadline, I rolled up to the place and they were still there. And some words started to be exchanged. I was like, look, dude, you had your chance to get out. Started grabbing stuff and throw it in the dumpster. One thing led to another and it turned into a physical altercation. And basically I just lost my shit and beat somebody up. But you know, it's not funny and it's not my proudest moment, but you know, that's what happened. And
Is what it is.
yeah. And then
So the police came, they arrested you, and and they had a mandatory sentencing, so you couldn't like cop a plea there?
So, well, I fled the incident. It became under investigation. I ended up leaving the country again for work and then coming back. And when I came back, my attorney advised me, says that, you know, they're going to put an arrest warrant out for you tomorrow. We've done some negotiations. You can turn yourself in. So basically I went and turned myself in, I bonded myself out. And then for almost 2 years, it was April 2017 before my actual trial, going through the process of investigation and the whole thing. They ended up putting more charges on me for not only assault, but for kidnapping, because I involuntarily moved this individual more than 3 feet during the process. And, you know, unfortunately, the way I look back at it, if, you know, the neighborhood that we're in, if it probably would happen in a different neighborhood, might have been different. I don't know. I mean, the bottom line is I committed a crime. I put hands on someone else. I put him in the hospital. He was in emergency room for 3 hours, got released. And, you know, it happened. And, you know, for the next 2 years, had it hanging over my head, went to trial. And they basically released everything, dropped the assault charge down from first degree. I was in the Marine Corps, as we were talking about a little bit earlier. The DA was actually in the Marine Corps, said I was unbecoming of a Marine and had kind of a hard on for me, and had trumped up a bunch of other charges, but the jury dropped it all down to just second degree assault versus first degree, because I didn't break anything. He wasn't, you know,
All right.
badly
We
hurt.
don't have to, we get it.
Yeah, I'm not
You
trying to
beat up
get
the
too
guy,
deep dive into it, but
sort of got away from you. This shit happens. So you turned yourself in, and you were handcuffed as soon as your trial was over.
Yep.
Where did they take you right away? Give us the chronology there.
Yeah, so I went directly to Denver County, which was basically the jailhouse attached to the courthouse here in Denver, Colorado. Waited 90 days for sentencing, went to sentencing, got my sentence, which became a 7-year sentence. And from there went to DRDC, which is the Diagnostics Receiving Center. For some reason, I got put into solitary confinement while I was there. I was there for just over a week in solitary. So it was like, that was a crazy experience. Like you see the movies of getting handcuffed, backed up to the door, getting handcuffed to be able to even walk out, take a shower. You get in the shower, they unhandcuff you. You get 5 minutes to get in the shower. 1 hour, you get put in a dog cage out in the yard, which is a concrete area between 2 buildings with 4 other cages and other guys in that area. And then from DRDC went to cell house 5 here in Colorado, which is down in Kansas City, which is one of the older prisons I think in the country. Definitely it's one of the first prisons in Colorado. And it was like be dating myself here, but natural born killers, like the old school 3 levels, the bars on it, the whole level things. And it was one of the crazier experiences because it's like people from all over go into this area and that's like the transfer station. So you're waiting there to see where you're going. There's guys that are coming from one prison going to the other prison. So you've got brand new guys like me that don't know anything, a fish, as they say, don't even know whether or not to put on your shower shoes to get in the shower, wait in line for soap and towels, like this whole new world just happened. And then like at nights, they would just like turn on the water, throw water out over things, water flowing over the 3rd tier down in the 1st tier. And these rooms were tiny. I mean, I could put my hands out and touch wall to wall, and there's just big enough for a cot, basically double people, 2 in the cells, toilet and sink right beside your bed, light on 24/7. So I was just like, oh man, this is
So let's address that. You were a guy, you hadn't gotten into trouble before. This was your first experience, and they immediately are putting you into solitary confinement for a week.
Yeah, why was that?
That sounds like it had to be like you had to be shaking your head like, what the fuck happened to my life like that, right?
Well, yeah, I was already 90 days in county, which like I said, was a room there's 8 of us in this room that was probably about 20 by 20 room with an open shower, open toilet, open sink. And there were,
I don't want to interrupt you, man, but there's people on here that aren't really aware of what's going on. We got people that have been in prison, people that haven't. So you mentioned a few things that I just want, before you answer Rich's question, to elaborate on to. Open shower, open sink. You mentioned black box, you're a good descriptor. Like, give people an idea of what an open toilet means.
Pretty much what it sounds like. It's a toilet sitting up against the wall with a sink attached to it. The stainless steel that basically anytime that you need to use it, you're using it in front of all your cellmates. So you kind of like go there with your sheet and hang out up in front of you and, do your business. And the same thing with the shower, no shower curtains, open shower right beside the toilet. So it's like,
privacy is done in prison.
Say that again.
I was just saying privacy doesn't exist inside.
No.
Why'd you go to solitary right away? Or for a week?
I'm still not for sure on that. I was asking them, I'm like, why am I in solitary and whatever? And they didn't have answers for me. And
wow.
It was just kind of a crazy experience. I didn't get put right into the population. And I don't know whether it had to do with some of the help I was getting prior and some of the socialites that I ran with, helping me out or what it could have been
Right,
with.
right.
But Yeah, but and I, you know, I was lucky and to the prison I went to, Arkansas Valley here in Colorado, which is a big house, but you know, my experience was that prison was not like some of the other prisons that are here in Colorado that are you know, pretty notorious for, you know, large gang populations and just being, you know, the battlefield of
Real violent, violent,
yeah. But you know, the pod that I got put into at Arkansas Valley, we were segregated by age there. So I was in the old man pod, not the super old man pod, but just the old man pod, 35 to 50. Is what so in prison population, I guess that's the older side of things.
You was in gladiator school, basically.
Get your points
it was
dropped.
not gladiator school. It was not gladiator school. But the pod that I was in, interesting enough, like 75% of the guys were doing life. So it was, I mean, it was a definitely real eye-opening experience. And I was in the pod with most of the gang leaders. And so it was like, they would always be meeting and talk about things on the yard and, you know, all these things. And I was just like, this world is crazy. You know, coming from a white collar type situation, straight into that, I was just like, you know, my whole universe got turned upside down. I felt like,
welcome to the belly.
right, exactly.
Were you very conscious about sort of toning down that, you know, that gap between you and your background and some of these other guys, you know, who had very, very different sort of backgrounds?
I was advised, so at DRDC when I was in solitaire, I met with a counselor and you know, walked in and had, you know, the GQ haircut and the glasses on or whatever. And he's like, dude, grow your hair out, get rid of the glasses, you know, don't be, he's like, you know, you need to kind of, you know, realize where you're going.
Blend in.
And that was kind of an eye-opening experience. He's like, you're walking in, you know, thinking you're walking into a board meeting and that's not what's going to be happening.
Different type of board meeting.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So that's, to me, is like I mean, that's something I went through. You know, I was very, very conscious of that, and that there were certain sort of unwritten, unspoken rules of behavior that you if you don't adhere to could have fairly dire repercussions.
Richard broke them all.
I'm a sort of a sarcastic, snarky sort of person. No, I am, Seth, really. And
No, I don't.
We believe you.
no, it's true. It's true.
No, I don't believe it.
you.
I don't believe you have that self-impression of yourself.
And you know, in my past life, I was judgmental and superior and, you know, a real asshole in general. And I realized very, very quickly that having this sort of sarcasm, you know, that among my, you know, a different life, that's the way people communicate. But that other people, you know, in prison, where self-respect is about the only thing you are left with, that if they feel at all judged or, you know, they're not happy about it at all. Right. And you got to just shut your mouth and not be ironic and not be clever and not like, you know, try to impress people. You know, did you find that you had to like learn that quickly?
Yeah, very much so. You know, in the county situation, I found myself in a situation, you know, we would play cards in the evening and became friendly with everybody and everyone kind of got to know each other just on, you know, on a probably superficial level a little bit, but, you know, we're all living together and having to deal with literally each other's shit. And there was a situation where actually my teammate in cards and spades ended up calling me racist. And he was black, I was white, and we were buddies and we like worked out together, we became pretty good friends. And there was this one incident that happened and it like turned the whole, not only our 8-man pod, but there was 10 of these in this area. And like that was the first time I kind of got caught up with potentially some gang issues, like the whole thing. I just realized I was just like not in a world like what you're saying, Richard, where you can just be bantering and playing around, and all of a sudden you say one thing that's completely taken out of context. And even though everybody else in the whole room didn't take it that way, the one person took it that way, and it can flip the whole dynamics on everything very quickly.
That's it's a good point too that you bring up, Buck, because like that's one of the things, and you know, that I noticed too is like if it's very ethnically divided, right? Like, and it's almost like, you know, you could be like, you know, everybody's everybody, and you're going through the prison system, and you're like forced to be in these groups, whether you want to or not, honestly. And it's like, you know, and then there's a broader macro thing going on, but like if you have an issue with somebody of your own ethnicity, right? Like you handle it whichever way it's going to get handled. But if you have an issue with somebody else that's a different ethnicity, or they have an issue with you and they're just a different ethnicity, like that's a yard wide thing.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. It became a big deal pretty quickly. So much so that they actually moved me from that pod and even that section of the county to another section. And they're like, you didn't do anything wrong. We like talked to everybody, but whatever, but this is just for your own good. I was like, okay. You know, like I didn't even really that was my first glimpse into like some of the danger that could have been really kind of happened really quickly. And that's on county. That wasn't even the big house, right? And then like, you know, so then getting to the big house and into the pod I was in, and realizing some of the guys that I was in with, and that whole thing, it became serious real quick. And, you know, I became lucky in the fact that I was doing yoga prior to the prison situation. I talked to people about creating a yoga program, started a yoga program, meditation program. I talked with a lot of the gang leaders and worked with them one-on-one on stuff. So it kind of became this different individual, you know, as they say, a narc, non-affiliated Caucasian. But at the same time, I was pretty friendly with the white boys and still pretty friendly with the Latin Kings, and had some friends with the Crips. And, you know, I found myself right when I was about getting ready to leave that position, that prison, to a camp to minimum security, where I got checked. And basically at that point, everyone's just like, we're not talking to you anymore, or whatever, because I didn't.
What do you mean by everybody? What that means?
What you mean by check?
I had one of the gang individuals call me out, basically saying, hey, you know, let's rumble. And basically it's like, who's gonna take your fate? If you're not in a fight, who's willing to do it? And like,
your fate, you take the fate.
Yeah. Basically stood out in the middle of the pod and created a pretty big scene. And it was scary for a minute. It was like really scary. And this individual had thought that I was messing with him. He was in the cell next to me, and come to find out, I mean, he had true mental issues. As you know, guys have been in prison. There's probably more people in there that need more mental health than they actually need the time per se, I guess what I'm saying. But and then like I found out after a couple of weeks I left, he ended up stabbing somebody a couple of times. But yeah, so you know, I had to sit down and meet with 2-3 different gang leaders on like, hey, here's my yellow slip. I'm not trying to get in trouble. Just let me get the hell out of here. You know, do my thing. And but yeah, so it was a real experience.
That's one thing that people don't, I think, often realize is in like anything is possible at any second inside, right? Yeah. You never know what people are dealing with, who they just got off the phone with, what news they heard from home, what they got from their legal situation, you know, how they woke up in the morning, like, you know, and me too, right? Like I don't, you know, like you're on this hyper awareness, you know, thing all the time, and it messes with you. And, you know, you take the attitude of the world where it's like, you know, chill out, or, you know, it's going to be okay, or whatever mantras that we say out in the world, right? It's, you know, that shit doesn't work.
Yeah. Could you explain what the yellow slip is?
It was basically my walking paper saying that I was going on to
the camp for the lower security.
Yeah.
So let me ask you a question, D, and I want to ask you, Seth, too. because both of you got, the three of us had success, in our lives prior to going away. D, you were a very successful drug dealer and you made a lot of money and you were a leader and you had a business and then you came into prison. Were you conscious of sort of checking your, I don't know, I don't want to say superiority, but, were you didn't want to you didn't want to be too confident or cocky, certainly. Were you conscious of that?
I mean, I was the type of person who I always had a high self-esteem and strong self-confidence in general, just how I carry myself. So it wasn't even like going into a thing where I felt superior. It was more so because I was in the same situations everybody else was in. I might have been better off, maybe I had a little bit more money, maybe I had a paid lawyer, whatever it was. But nevertheless, it's almost like when you grow up in the projects, when you grow up in poverty in the hood, prison, violence, like these things that you're almost acclimated to these things unconsciously and intuitively before you even go. So when I went, I knew how to just move through the system just in general, because most people there are from the projects, they're from the same background as me. So navigating that was just much more easier than someone like being a Marine, hanging out with socialites, coming from Wall Street, coming from the NBA and you know what I mean? And all that, like that's a whole different element you're coming from.
Okay. What about you, Seth? You were an NBA a star in the NBA.
Yeah, right.
You told a young Kobe Bryant, matter of fact.
Yeah. If by star you mean fringe, then you're absolutely right.
A fringe NBA player is still a damn successful athlete. I'm very proud of you, Seth. So stop beating yourself up.
I'm not beating myself. I'm just trying to bring us into reality.
I can't pop your ego up anymore. It's been years. Come on. No, but when
he was a star when he went overseas.
Yeah, he was a star in Croatia. In Croatia, he's very highly thought of. Don't kid yourself, Buck. So, Seth, let me ask you, were you conscious, because not only were you an NBA player, but you're also very, grotesquely tall is the only way I can put it. So, I mean, you stand out anywhere, right? I've been with you.
Yeah.
Were you conscious of, was there any way for you to sort of back off and sort of, slink into the background?
Yeah, I a couple of things. So the interesting thing, and I just started kind of realizing this about myself prior to going to prison, but I thought I was confident when I was playing basketball and all that, but really what I understood and started to learn, kind of in my later years was I was just really insecure. It was all of this kind of like fault, and I was masking it as confidence. And basketball was a really, really great opportunity for me to hide a lot of my own kind of personal insecurity because I was good at that and I could throw myself into it and do all these things.
What were you insecure about? Or what are you insecure about as long as you
I'm not anymore. Now, because before it was like, I guess I am a little bit, but it was more like, let me please other people. How do other people think that a basketball star should be like? And I'll be like that. And I'll do things, because of that, not because of that's of who I am. Right. So prison for me was an opportunity to really, take a couple years before what I was learning about who I was and all that and just go, oh, okay, you want to learn who you are? Fucking go in there. You'll figure out who you are. Right. And it kind of was like, and I'm grateful for that, for that time, for that, it's painful and it's heart wrenching. And, sometimes the hardest thing we have to do is look at ourselves in the mirror. Right. So, and in there and, Buck was in the shoe, for a while, like there's nobody but you, you got to deal with you. And so anyway,
thank you for sharing all that. As a friend and, I really appreciate your honesty. Buck, you sort of alluded to that, like this made you really look at your life. What were you thinking? I've never been in solitary. Seth, you've done that time. I don't know if you have, Divine. I haven't.
Solitary.
What were you thinking for a week, Buck, locked up alone for 23 hours a day. What kind of thoughts went through your mind? Were you going crazy a little bit?
The first couple days, not so much, just because it was kind of a nice reprieve after being in a room with 8 other guys and whatever. So having some space all on my own was actually kind of welcome in a weird way. But like that third day, it started to wear on me, and then I kept on asking them, like, well, why am I here? And they're like, well, we don't really have an answer for you. I was like, okay. I was like, can I, use the phone? No, you can't use the phone. You're considered high risk, all this stuff. I was like, why? I mean, I was put in a red jumpsuit. I was and then Seth, to answer your question earlier, when I say black box, so black boxed is not only handcuffed, there's a black box in the handcuff. So you can't move the chain.
That's what the feds do it.
Handcuffs within the handcuffs.
Handcuffs within the handcuffs, and then around your waist, and then on your ankles as well.
So in the side of prison, which
yeah. So it was that started to wear on me, and then having to like back up to the door and get handcuffed just to go to the shower. And I was like, guys, I'm not like I'm chatting with you every time you walk by. How are you doing mentally? But it just became like anytime they came by with like any kind of puzzles, anything to read, was like, just give me anything to do, It was like, like, give me a book. And finally, I got a couple books that I was able to get, but it's like, here's the Bible. I was like ferociously reading the Bible and anything else to get my hands on. So it was just like, whatever I could do. Is like I had this one little window. I'd wake up in the morning and like there would be little bunny rabbits out there playing around. I'd just sit there and watch them and watch the sunrise and the sunset.
Oh, there weren't, Buck.
But it's just like
that's after the week.
We're not
you get to see bunny rabbits outside your window.
Yeah,
that's a bad sign. So Buck, you went. So they sent you to the big house, as you put it, which was the state prison. And you got involved with yoga and meditation, and you were holding classes, and I guess you sort of developed, you had a role there, and that you brought value to the other inmates, so you were finding sort of your way there. Tell me about where art, the epiphany you had with art, what brought that on? You yourself were an artist, but what sort of hit you like, holy shit, there's a lot of talent here in prison?
Well, I mean, kind of like day one going into county and just seeing everybody kind of doing different things to do time. Whether it was picking up, like the little pencils that we had that were 3 inches long and whatever, and scribbling, and guys taking trash bags and ripping them apart and making strands out of them and braiding them together to make braided necklaces of crosses and different things, and drink catchers, and using sugars and like Jolly Ranchers and stuff to make watercolors and all this stuff. I was just like, what is going on? These guys are crazy. But I was like, some of the stuff that they were turning out was
innovation.
Yeah, exactly. Totally just, I mean, ingenuity, human ingenuity on like just how can we get threads? Well, we'll tear apart the trash bag that's in our cell and string it across the whole way cell and start spinning it and then making these things, is and then getting to Arkansas Valley, and then kind of starting to settle in a little bit, and then seeing some of the drawings that were being made and understanding the barter system, even though that's not allowed, but guys making portraits and cards for loved ones to send home, and all these things, and guys getting a picture from home and having this one a certain artist replicate that drawing into a graphite drawing, and that going back out as a gift. And they're trading it for jars of peanut butter, a pack of tuna, or a book of stamps. I was like, started thinking, I was like, well, I mean, like, what if you could actually sell that for some decent money? I mean, because that's I mean, if you went to a gallery, that's probably $150, $200, $500 potentially. You know, what about that? I mean, like, and then realizing that, wow, you know, I was, you know, Divine, as you say, it wasn't like elitist or whatever. I was just in a better situation that I had a wherewithal to have money on my books while I was in. But a lot of these guys, you know, as yoga instructor, I made $7.50 a month. That wouldn't even buy you a book of stamps to stay, you know, stay in touch. So it's like, you know, if it wasn't for having that wherewithal, how would I have been able to even make a phone call? I mean, phone calls sometimes cost that much. Yeah. So it was just like, you know, literally $50 a month could change somebody's life, and just kind of realizing that. And this kind of my entrepreneur mind, you call me an artist. I guess you could say I am, as the mural was my creation, even though it was a digital artist that brought my idea and put it into place. But I'm more of an entrepreneur and than an artist. But I think entrepreneurship is artistry in its own self. It's just, I think art is anytime that you can think of something and bring that to a reality in some form or fashion. And then, you know, it can be whether it be necklace and beadings or drawings or paintings, or in our cases, making a company come to life. But seeing that just really resonated. And I grew up, my grandma was an artist and taught art school in Black Mountain College in North Carolina. And so I was kind of always surrounded by that, and it just kind of touched me. And so, and I've always seen arts as a way that can bridge gaps between different individuals that don't necessarily have any connection, but someone can see a piece of artwork done by someone and it can just really resonate with them, right? Like, and just be like, wow, that's really cool. How does your mind work that way to be able to do that? Or how can you sit down and you know, on a stainless steel stool that's 2 feet off the ground with a little stainless steel table and a ballpoint pen that's not even a ballpoint pen, it's just the ink cartridge that's inside of it, and do this crazy drawing that is just like so insane and detailed that you're just like, you know, how many hours did that take you? But they could actually turn it out like in a day, just losing themselves in that time.
Let me ask you, so I saw a lot of talent in prison too, you know, and, you know, people painting and tattooing and drawing and crafts. So I really wondered, is the environment of prison conducive to artistic expression? Is the time that's available? Is there something meditative there? Or do artists, a high percentage of people in prison, do they have that artistic gene? Is it in their DNA?
Well,
in other words, you know, are artists closely correlated to crime?
Well,
you know?
Richard, I think twofold. I think one, if you're creative and your mind is always wondering and being creative, you might find yourself in a little bit more trouble than others, just because of your being creative and working not necessarily in the box of what necessarily, like, this is how you're supposed to do stuff. But if you're creative, you're like, well, why am I supposed to do it that way? Why can't I do it this way? That's even more better. And then they're like, well, you're not supposed to do it that way because the rules say so. Well, who says the rules are supposed to say that? You know, so
art is breaking rules and crime is breaking rules.
Right.
And LSD is also breaking rules.
What is?
LSD, which expands your mind.
Yeah. Well, I mean, being here in Colorado, you know, they just criminalized that and a lot of other things. So
I want to ask you something.
A lot of expansion going on.
So you were fairly successful, right? You were a former Marine. You got out the service. I mean, if you think about the Fortune 500 companies, most of those are ran by people who have been in the armed forces, right? You have the discipline, you have that fortitude of mind, and so you were fairly successful. You were actually renting property, I believe, or what have you. So you were fairly successful. Ran with socialite. You mentioned the word socialite. So to me, it's always interesting to see how people or individuals that come from that background of quote unquote privilege in some form or some fashion, whether that's Wall Street, whether that's, former Marine, now, having real estate property, whether that's somebody who came from the NBA. It's always like a different experience where it's not like your pathway, no one would predict your pathway to be that of federal prison or that of state prison, that of 5 years, 10 years, where me, somebody who comes from the projects, poverty, that's actually my destiny. Like
Right.
I'm destined to be in prison, like the statistics say that, right? So I'm always interested to hear stories from individuals, not from my background, but from the other side of life, of that type of privilege, to see how they responded to prison, right? Prison's like this big shock, and they find themselves, I mean, everybody I think finds themselves in prison, but it's always a different journey for people that don't come from that pathway where the destiny is prison, where it's a known fact, like you're going to prison by the time you're 18 if you're not dead.
Yeah. So,
You know what
I mean, like, to your point, Divine, I mean, like a lot of my friends there, I mean, like they were like, this is a school, it's, kid around like it's art school, or it's rite of passage or whatever. It's as you just said, it's a statistical date. It's, some of the guys joked around and said, it's drug dealers retirement. And I mean, it kind of made me sad when I thought about that. And I don't know if I was consider myself privileged, but I mean, it's.
But you never thought you'd be in prison for that long.
Say that again.
You never thought you'd be in prison. That was never a thought in your mind.
I know. Well, I mean, I never. Yeah, I mean, it's not.
I mean, like you beat somebody up.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like I ever was like thinking like, oh my God, I'm like my life path of what I'm doing is in the risk of doing it. Whereas like being a drug dealer or being in poverty or whatever,
right.
like exactly the risk. You're rolling those dice every time you go out, right? So yeah, I wasn't necessarily rolling that dice, but then found myself in that position. And it's just like I said, like literally the universe turned upside down. It was prison culture, the whole experience. And I constantly say, I mean, prisons, parts of it were amazing for me. The deep dive into myself and to some of the issues that I had from my military days and prior to that on PTSD. I grew up on a ranch in Texas as a country boy. Grew up on, basically we had like no trespassers would be shot, signs up on our ranch, and grew up in that mentality. Went straight in the Marine Corps out of high school, was overseas and carrying loaded weapons and getting shot at, and just craziness. And then but the prison experience was like facing that was even more scary than that to me, because it's just the unknown of it. It was like, well, I know what I'm signing up for here. I was like, okay.
That's the point that I'm making. The shock value of like the whole.
So D, let me answer that. There's a good point then. So coming from your perspective, then without that shock and awe, like I don't think I've ever answered this. Like without that shock, or like it's like, okay, this is like a path that is you're already there. Like you're already like, did you know how to? Was that shock not there for you? Was you just like, okay, cool.
No, the pain was there, the shock wasn't there, and it wasn't enough to deter me from going back in the streets and going right back to drug dealing, to the cycle of recidivism. In and out for 30, 20 years. You know what I'm saying? Because prison wasn't something that deterred me. Prison wasn't nothing to me. I didn't care about prison. Like, okay, I'm just thinking, don't get caught. I'm going to make this money, because survival instincts was I got to survive and make this money. That's the only way that I knew. I didn't know.
But if you had this sense of destiny that your fate ultimately was you were going to go to prison, then how could you be successful if you knew that was going to happen inevitably?
Exactly. That's the negative psychological cycle that we get caught into.
Right.
When you come from poverty, because in one instance, selling drugs is not, you don't look at that as bad. You look at that as good, because you're actually providing for your family. You're actually providing for yourself. So you don't look at it as a negative, even though the negative comes behind it. Your whole thing is, I'm going to play this game to try to win, right? And it becomes in your mind becomes, okay, I'm smarter than the cops. I can do this that way, stack that money, get that bread, take care of my family. So that overrides any type of inclination or thought that this leads to prison or death.
So you thought you were going to beat the system,
I was definitely trying to, absolutely.
but I mean, so you didn't necessarily know for sure you were going to end up in prison, is my point.
No.
Okay.
Just playing the numbers at that
But
point.
statistics,
going like
statistics
shit.
say what? That I
But
am.
And if you did, then it's you know how to move in there. You're already trained up on like, hey, like this
is all part of the game.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
that's
part
my
of
point.
this.
Is what I'm saying is that people in poverty and come from this life, that's their life. It's
Yeah.
not a Wall Street life. It's not an NBA player's life. It's not whatever life he had. That's the difference, is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Is that this life that we have, it's like we know, because we've seen it.
You
We see the
resent
patterns.
that you had so few options? That would
Absolutely.
piss me off, I would think.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So
That
so
was
let's
your one option.
so what would you say other options are? I mean, now you know, right? You have the benefit of hindsight. Like if you're talking to your 20-year-old self, you know what I mean? And was he just incorrigible and just like, man, this fucking knucklehead's gonna, do it. I have a hard time thinking of, talking to my 20-year-old self too, So it's like, that's how I think I'd respond. But like, what would you tell your 20-year-old self when like,
No, or what would you tell the people who are on the 250,000 tablets that are going to be hearing you?
right.
What's your message to them?
Yo, believe in yourself and don't lose hope and have faith and carry that faith and that hope into something that's productive and positive that will lead you to a better outcome, a more positive outcome. You know what I mean? We can't change. There's so many social ills that exist with people coming from poverty, and the wealth gap is so wide. There's so many issues that need to be addressed to get to a point where people from poverty can have positive pathways and frameworks, whether it's mentorship, whether it's entrepreneurship programs, whatever it is, to lead them out of poverty in a positive path. Poverty there's a direct correlation between poverty and crime, as we know, and we know that leads right to prison, right? So
Yeah.
It's all about creating those pathways that don't lead to those outcomes, and that takes more than one person. It takes a community, it takes a nation, it takes the state, it takes a lot of different things to make that possible.
And
Do you think that there's-
go ahead, Richard. Sorry.
Go ahead, Seth. I was going to say, do you think there are more options now than when you were 20?
I think through information and access through the internet has made information available and accessible to people who have the wherewithal to go seek it out, find it, and then have the discipline to take that and turn that into something like I did.
Mhm.
Like even though I came late in the game, I still was able to grasp it and do something and flip my life around.
So let's say you're talking
was there.
let's say you're talking to your 20-year-old self right now in today, 2021, and it's your 20-year-old self right now doing knucklehead shit that you were doing before, right? Like, what do you tell yourself today now? What are other options? What are other paths? What else is there?
Well, the first thing I would do is take accountability for them individuals by becoming a mentor, by mentoring them and showing them this is what I did. This is how Divine did it. I come from the same pathway. I come from the same struggle. You know what I mean? This is what I did. This is how I thought about it. And that's how I did it. And then show them that, right?
Yeah.
Concrete results, my life.
Yeah.
Well, I think you're doing some of that stuff, D,
Thank you.
and I think the work with us, has to do with that. What would be the message, Buck, to 20-year-olds who are in prison who are going to be hearing you talk, who maybe have a dissimilar background, or maybe some just like you, presumably, but what should they know that you've learned?
Yeah, I mean, to Divine's point, I mean, I met friends there that guys my age that their sons were in prison just because they're following the same pathway and just caught up into that mindset and not knowing any better. And other guys that were younger going, man, I was running drugs when I was 8 years old, not even know I was running drugs because his dad or uncle was being like, hey, run this package over to so-and-so. And, it's just like, that's just the way that we grew up. And it's like, it wasn't, if I'm going to prison, it's like I'm going to prison at some point. It wasn't like it just had this mentality that, I mean, for me, it was just such an eye opener into that mentality, Divine, on what you're saying on that just the struggle of life and what you're doing to try to make it and to survive and to provide for your family, or to come up in the game, or even just to try to do anything when you don't have a whole lot of other opportunities, but there's somebody saying, hey, you can do this and make a whole lot of money really quick. I mean, what are you going to do? Especially,
But Buck, I'm talking about you.
I know,
And you're talking to people, we all can sort of empathize with what Divine is saying. I mean, it's obvious. But what about you? What did you learn? There are people, 20-year-olds in prison who are like you, or might become like you and go, people who got out of the military, people who, Sid said, don't have a hot head. What is the lesson
keep your hands
to
to
be
yourself.
learned? What did you learn that they should know?
Well, I mean, I think everybody has their own pathway, right? So the one thing I think is taking a moment in time, if you can. Prison afforded me a lot of time to be able to dive into myself and to understand some of my ticks that were going off and what I was understanding myself thinking and what got me into that position where I was at. Like I said, the proverbial frog in boiling water, on my thoughts on what I was continuously thinking about this individual, on how that ramped up my anger internally, and that I snapped at a moment. Fortunate, whatever you might want to say, my training kicked in and it led into other things. I don't have a direct answer for you, Richard, on what to say. Looking back at my 20-year-old self, I don't know if I, have an answer for that. It just, it's such an interesting question on what to tell individuals on that.
You want to have an answer, don't you?
I do want to have, I don't have one off the top of my head.
One thing, knowing you, and you said it earlier, actually, and I don't know if you actually caught it, but you're like, look, like responsibility was a big thing for you, right? Like, you're like, oh, this is my responsibility. I'm responsible for this, like all this shit, right? Like, and, I mean, I think that's one thing, just knowing you, like I've gotten to know you, recently, and is that you exemplify that responsibility. And like, you mentioned it from a universal standpoint, but also like the prison system, like at least in the feds, they give you 3 points for accepting responsibility off of your your sentencing chart, right? Like, and I was always like, man, fuck that, I'm not, like and that, that was a lesson, it's like, oh, if you just accept the responsibility of everything, like radically,
yeah,
you know what I mean, then things can shift and change. So
Well, I'll jump in on that one, Seth, since you helped jog me there. The answer to that question, Richard, I'd say stay present. Don't get caught up in your own thoughts, and don't turn your own thoughts into a reality that's not true. Because it's easy to talk yourself up or talk yourself down, or to lose contact with the actual present moment. And if you just stay in that present moment, I mean, I know it's so easy to say because of life's pressures are so hard. I mean, like for me, like sometimes I look back and go, man, prison life was pretty simple. I woke up in the morning, I got fed, or I fed myself oatmeal and peanut butter, and went and worked out, trained, and then I taught yoga, and then hung out in the evening with the guys and did whatever. I was like, it was pretty.
People pay good money to go away for that.
Buck, weren't you doing yoga prior to going to prison?
I was, yeah, but I was not instructing yoga. So, but
right. So so there you have it. So you have it. You're a yoga guy. You still get angry. You still get upset. Whatever, whether that's from PTSD or wherever the root of that is.
Yeah.
Someone disrespected you. Like I can imagine, like even to this day and time, we come from prison. People disrespect us, call us names. It just clicks, right?
Yeah.
So it clicked in you. You did what you did. So even then, it goes to show you that there's always development upon development that has to be done.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the biggest thing, is just keep an open mind, always learn. Don't get caught up into what other people think too much. Don't try to, like I said, we all have our own pathways, and it's an interesting concept on to tell a young guy, hey, think this way or do this way or whatever. I mean, fuck, dude, your testosterone's hitting you hard. You're like, all I want to do is go out and chase ass. I want to make some money and I want to have a good time. Right. And so it's like,
Young and full of time.
and so the more money I can make, probably the better looking ass I'll get and the better car I'm going to drive. And
that's what you think. You think mundane.
So, and then once we get a little bit older, Richard and Seth and Divine, now you being a grandpa, you can kind of look back and not to disrespect, you have a granddaughter, but you kind of go,
yeah,
I'm an older bull now,
Yeah, exactly. You got to slow it down. Can't be
down
selling
the
those
hill
oats no more.
Yeah. But, I really hope that, and where I was going earlier with the divine thing, and you came back down on bringing it to myself and what I was saying, I was kind of pulling that full circle. I was trying to on that. It's unfortunate that so many individuals think that prison is a normal pathway, that they don't see a different point of view than that. And I would just say, hey, you have a different choice. You can make a mental choice today to do something different that no longer says that that's going to be your pathway.
I never had that. I never had that mentor to tell me that. I never had someone to pull my coat and me, listen, bro, this is the way you should go.
Star. Don't worry about selling ads. Go sell it. Go sell.
Yeah. Like you have entrepreneurial spirit. Like you need to channel that into something positive.
Yeah.
I never had that.
Yeah, for sure. So tell us, Art for Redemption. Tell us what you're trying to accomplish. Tell us where you're at. Tell everybody. I'm sure Adrian will put up a link to your website. You and I have talked about it, and we want to get involved in this because, and I agree that number one, there is spectacular talent in prison, that there's currently no way for most people to be discovered. There's no platform out there. And it's a way for people to earn a living, particularly the talented ones. What is your mission? What are you doing to accomplish it?
So our mission is to really provide a platform to allow incarcerated artists to make a living or make money through their creativity. The way I've always kind of looked at this is 95% of the guys are getting out, right? And 95 of these guys are going to be released back into your community. Would you rather them be released back in your community with them having paid some of their restitution, having a savings account, having something that they've done that's provided them hope and a sense of place, and that they've done have something that they can hang their hat on and coming back into the community. We worked when I first got out, started working with the Department of Corrections here in Colorado on changing the rules on allowing inmates to actually hold a contract with an outside company that's not an affiliated correctional institutional company, so that you're basically working for that. You're basically, slave labor. I think the best job that could have been got at Arkansas Valley at the time was $1.85 an hour, and then at the camp it was like $2.50 an hour. Yeah, that's really good. Yeah, that's why I'm saying it's really good. So, but it's still only ending up like
I made
I work.
Yeah. It was a lot better than $7.50 a month. Let me tell you that. But so our mission is to open that up and to bridge the gap of inside and outside. And I think arts has always been a way to bridge gaps in societies. And so artforredemption.com, we have a webpage up. We just launched a marketplace that we're selling print on demands of some of the originals that we got. We're launching our original marketplace here in the next couple of weeks. We'll be launching an NFT marketplace in a collaboration with some artists. And we launched a crowdfund, and the idea of the crowdfund is that we ran a nationwide contest. We picked 100 artists from the contest that will be published in this coffee table book. Dean Williams, who's the executive director of the Department of Corrections in Colorado, has agreed to write the foreword to the book in a letter, and we're hoping to be able to send one of these books with the foreword and letter from Dean to all wardens and Department of Correction heads on potentially hoping to open up or incite reform in other systems like we've done here in Colorado. So that's kind of that is our mission, not kind of. And our hope is that people can come to the marketplace and see, hey, you know, as we've all talked about earlier, we all make mistakes, right? We're human beings. We make mistakes. That's just part of it. There's not a day that you don't put on your pants. We all put on our pants the same. Girls might, you know, slip on a dress a little bit different, I guess. But, you know, part of life is learning from your mistakes. And like I said, you get into forgiveness, and there's so many individuals that I saw in prison and became friends with, even lost touch with their family because they lost hope, lost touch with their support networks because they couldn't afford to make the phone calls or to get the stamps, and just got caught up into that, as Divine, you're saying, that criminal mentality, you know, and the prison system breeds the criminal mentality. It's a predatory, upside down system. And unless we can go from a penal system, which there's the punishment, the prison, being in prison, as you guys know, being segregated from the population, being away from your loved ones, missing birthdays, missing births. If you know, granddaughters, you're out now, but if you would have been in, you know, how many guys did you see that missed those opportunities?
Funerals,
yeah, the whole, I mean, like, just missing life. You're missing life while you're in prison. But if you can be afforded the chance to create something, put it out into the world, and it be bought, and it then helps you pay your restitution, your child support, stay in contact with your support networks, why wouldn't we want that to happen?
Yeah,
we do. We do. And what you're doing is really great, and we want to support it. And you and I have discussed ways that we can. So this is something I think you're the right guy to do it. You're very thoughtful and intentional about it. And you bring the right energy. So keep up the good work.
Thank you.
I wanted to just mention before we go, there's a couple of things that are going on that perhaps folks have been reading about. Number one, the Sentencing Project, which is a nonprofit that's very well thought of, they just came out with a report. And among other things, they talk about state prisons, whereby they have come to understand that 2 out of 3 people in state prisons are 55 years or older. 2 out of 3 are over 55 years of age. And they found further, which is no great surprise, that people of that age just age out of crime. They don't get in trouble again. You know, Divine, the business you were in, the drug business, which a lot of people are in prison as a result, you don't have 55 and 60-year-olds slinging drugs on the street, or, you know, getting involved with violence, particularly. We're just too, I'm 67. I'm just too old to commit crimes anymore. And yet there are still so many people in prison who present no threat whatsoever. And yet they're rotting away at risk of catching COVID, you know, separated from their families, doing their communities and families no good while they're there, at great cost to society. And there's absolutely no purpose that's being served, none whatsoever. You know, the data is completely clear on this, which sort of brings me to the next thing that's going on right now. You know, several thousand people were in prison, were released as the coronavirus hit under a compassionate release program. And these were people typically who were older or had health issues that put them at particular risk. And they were let out of prison. Now, as things are, you know, maybe winding down regarding the pandemic, although in the state that I live in Florida, it's never been worse. But now the Biden administration has to sort of make some decisions about sending people back, particularly in the federal system. And it's absolutely ridiculous. I believe the statistics are that absolutely no one who was let out under compassionate release got into any trouble whatsoever. There was no downside to it at all. The upside was people weren't subjected to getting sick and dying in prison. And, you know, our country wasn't burdened with the expense of warehousing them. And it just sort of serves as a model that they can be let out and the world is not gonna be the worse for it. As a matter of fact, it's gonna be much, much better. So there's a groundswell effort that's going on right now to try to convince the Biden administration to let the people who have been released compassionately, let our compassion continue and keep them out, because there's no downside for them being out and there's huge upside. So I've made a phone call, and as hundreds of thousands of others have, and I would urge everybody, here's a phone number, it's 202-946-3132, that's the White House. And call them up, and I don't know that Joe will be picking up the phone, but I think someone will. And if you let them know how you feel about this issue, if enough people do it, our president certainly will know about it, and hopefully that can sway things. But there are thousands of people who have been let out, and they've just provided a model of how that can really work. And there's absolutely no benefit to anybody to send them back. It's heartbreaking. It's cruel to do it at this point. So please, 202-946-3132, call the White House and tell them what you think. Having Buck on, it's been great. And Buck, we're really appreciative that you would join us. And,
Thank you.
You know, we really enjoyed having you here. You know, we wish Art for Redemption all the success, and we want to do, you know, what we can do to help. So we'll continue that conversation. And, you know, certainly everybody who's watching this either live or through the Zoom room or elsewhere, or who will see it in the future, please get in touch with Buck. And please, you know, let's learn from people like Buck who feel an obligation to, you know, he feels it to his brothers and sisters who are in prison, as do, you know, I know Divine does, and I know Adrian does, and my team does, and Seth does, and I do, and many of you do too. Do what you can. You know, God knows if we don't do it, who will? But if we do it, if we look after one another, things are going to be a hell of a lot better. So I thank you all. Please stay safe. Please get vaccinated if you haven't, so that you can not get sick. I just found out that a good friend of mine from prison is on life support, and it doesn't look good for him. You know, he chose not to get vaccinated, and unfortunately, we're probably going to lose him, a really good guy. So please don't be a statistic. You know, don't let your ego get in the way, because we want to have you, and we want to see you next week on another episode of The Yard. So everybody have a great night. We'll see you next week.
Peace and blessings, everybody.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Bucks. Great, man.
Buck.